Okay, the recording should be on now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, hello everyone. I'm going to be doing my presentation today on the Free Britney Movement. I've given it the subtitle Ableism, Sexism, and Conservatorships. Oh my, it is very dramatic and very much so been in the press for the last, I want to say, year, since the Hulu documentary came out. And I watched that, which was probably the first time I heard about it, and it just blew my mind. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it today. So as you can see, I've put a little meme GIF on the first page. I don't know, this meme circulated on Vine, I want to say. It like was reborn. I used to see it on that platform a lot. And so this video, very famous video, was released on September the 10th, 2007, and it gained over 2 million views in the first 24 hours that it was uploaded. So how did we get there? How did we get to having this crazy viral movement and all this publicity over Britney Spears? So this is part one of my presentation. Also, shout out to Canva for being very aesthetic in PowerPoint presentations. Okay, so Britney Spears was born into a very, very small town in rural Louisiana in 1981 in December. The first time she really received any type of fame was in 1993. She auditioned and got the part in I misspelled Mickey Mouse, the Mickey Mouse Club, at age 11, and on the show she did a lot of singing and dancing, and that's where she received a lot of media attention. But unfortunately the show was only cancelled a year later. But just from her being on that show for just a year, that small amount of time, she still received a lot of attention and publicity as this young, talented girl who was going to go on and do great things, which she absolutely did. And also in this picture, you will notice, I mean, I honestly didn't recognize him at first, but that's a picture of a very young Justin Timberlake. She was also on the show with him. I know, drama. Yeah, I will mention him more later on. But yeah, so in 1994, Britney goes back home and she attends high school. She has like a normal teenage life. She plays basketball. Her home life is relatively normal. She has a younger sister, a younger brother, and I think another younger sister as well. But at the time, she's pretty estranged from her father. He struggles with alcohol, he goes to rehab, and he files for bankruptcy. So he's not very involved in her life until she records her debut album, Hit Me Baby One More Time, and in 1998. So after the release of her album, her life got pretty intense very, very quickly. She goes out on her first concert tour. She opens for NSYNC. She debuts at #1. She poses for her first major magazine. She hosts and performs on Saturday Night Live, and she releases her second album, Oops, I Did It Again. The album sells more than 20 million copies worldwide, and she's accomplished all of this by 19. And I also wanted to note that she is incredibly involved in every aspect of her career. She designs all the albums, the album covers, she choreographs everything. She's very big into dance as well as singing. So she's very much so artistically and in control of every aspect of this business. She's very business savvy. She says a lot that she's doing this stuff because she enjoys it, not necessarily to make money, but she's still very much so involved in the business side of the image, the branding of Britney Spears. Okay, Justin Timberlake. So this is when she starts to lose the narrative. So she has this crazy huge rise to fame and stardom, and this whole Britney Spears, this image that her management team and that she herself and she cultivates is this brand of this good Christian American girl next door. She talks a lot about her Christian faith and wanting to wait until marriage to have sex for the first time, which is crazy that like people in the media would even ask a 19-year-old those kinds of questions. Because during this time, Britney was in a relationship with Justin Timberlake from 1999 to 2002. And in America, this was probably one of the first ever very big celebrity couples, like Kanye, Kim kind of level. Like this was American royalty, and everyone was incredibly invested in like every aspect of their relationship. And you need to remember that during this time, Britney is like 19 years old. You know, this is her first real long-term relationship, and she's being dragged in the media and being asked all these really uncomfortable questions about her sex life. And there's like this really uncomfortable clip of a journalist asking if she's still a virgin, and she's so uncomfortable, and it's just disgusting. And meanwhile, while this is happening, they have a terrible breakup in 2002, and Justin completely drags her in the media. He brags about having sex with her. He brags about you know, taking Britney's virginity. It's like this whole disgusting narrative that he paints, and he creates this very, very raunchy sexual music video, which is incredibly controversial because it shows a woman who looks exactly like Britney Spears, and it's just very degrading, very misogynistic. It's very it's very clear that this was at a time when sexism was very prevalent in the industry. And he also claims that on top of all of this, that Britney cheated on him, and that's why they ended up breaking up. So again, this beautiful American couple that everyone considered to be royalty, he blames Britney on ruining it, on destroying it, and he's heartbroken and all this stuff. So this is when the media kind of starts to villainize Britney Spears a little bit, and it kind of, you know, it's also incredibly stressful, and I can't ever imagine going through a breakup with, you know, the first person I've ever been in a relationship. They were together for 3 years. They met when they were children, going through that kind of public breakup that was just so messy. And yeah. So she takes a pause from music, from releasing new albums for a brief period after the breakup and after all the media attention, to kind of focus on herself and her family. So she marries Kevin Federline, who was a backup dancer for her, and they end up having 2 sons before divorcing in 2007, which is a whole another can of worms that I'll get into in a second. But Britney became a lot more private once she had children. She rightly so wanted privacy and wanted to be able to live her own life as a mother and as an artist. So it's really hard to explain, like the tabloid industry, that just magazines and the media didn't care about Britney as a person, Britney as a mother, Britney as somebody who's undergone a lot of mental health stresses. All they cared about was getting those money shots, and those could be sold for up to $1 million. So like her suffering and her stress, and seeing her in stress, was something that could make you millions and millions of dollars. And one of the things that immediately happens when she does become a mother is everyone has an opinion on how she's parenting. She's immediately criticized for being an unfit mother. This picture that I included on the slide was incredibly controversial. She's seen her in a car with her child on her lap. She's not wearing a seatbelt. She's just trying to get out of her driveway. But the paparazzi is banging on the windows of her car. She says in an interview later on that she felt very unsafe. She felt like her child was unsafe, and the best thing that she felt like she could do was to just have her child close to her. But of course, everyone had an opinion, and she was criticized very heavily. And when she first became famous in the late 90s, early 2000s, she very much so enjoyed paparazzi attention, and it was like a fun thing, but now it's become very real. It's become more of a threat to her safety and her children's safety. Excuse me. So she very much so becomes a lot more private about her and her children. So her divorce, so she divorced Kevin in 2007, a few weeks after the birth of her second son. And this is a very messy divorce. She files for sole custody of her children, and Kevin does the same. So they're both in this very brutal custody battle. And meanwhile, Britney is also struggling with postpartum depression. And she has so much stuff going on in her private life that she no longer cares about her carefully managed public image. She just wants to feel some freedom, go out with her friends. She got a lot of public criticism during this time for going out partying and spending time with friends instead of spending time at home with her children. This is a picture of her with Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan during the time. And of course, the media had so many opinions about this. They wanted, you know, this perfect Britney Spears that they all assumed she was in the late 90s. So Britney is continually harassed and followed by the press. She cannot get a break. She cannot run away from them. They're always there, always watching, always judging. And so in protest, she decides to shave her head. And the hairdresser that she went to actually refused to do it. So even when she was asking someone to do something that she wanted with her body, that person refused. So she did it herself. And one of the quotes that I just thought was really powerful when she was doing this was, "I don't want anybody touching me. I'm tired of everybody touching me." This was a way of Britney saying, I quit. Like, I'm done with being this person that you want me to be. That young girl that was this picture perfect American girl next door, she's done. Like, you guys have killed her with all the harassment and the bullying by the press. She's gone and I quit. But of course, that's not the narrative that the media portrayed. The press completely obliterated her for doing this, and they made a lot of money doing it. So of course they were going to do what made them the most money instead of doing something that was kind. And they saw her shaved head only as a statement of how quote unquote crazy she was during this time period. And that was all over the news. It was all in magazines. It was on late night shows. This just crazy narrative that Britney Spears had lost her mind. She shaved her head and she'd gone insane. And I'm going to talk now about the infamous photo. Before I show the photos, because I don't know if people know what I'm talking about. There's a very famous photo of Britney with her head shaved and she's holding an umbrella and she looks very violent and very agitated. And it became like the poster image of Britney Spears has lost her mind. So before I show those pictures, I want to give some background and clarity on what we're actually seeing here. So that night that this photo was taken, Britney went to go and see her children, who were staying with her ex-husband at the time, but he refuses to let her see them. So she then leaves the house with her cousin, but the paparazzi on her way out, they find her and they follow her to a gas station. And her cousin is asking them, you know, please go away. Like, Britney's like, it's a tough night. And so eventually she returns to Kevin's house again with her cousin and asks to see her children. He refuses. He doesn't want to talk to her. He denies this mother access to her children. So she leaves again, and all this time they're followed by the press, who's asking her questions, telling her to smile, you know, asking what's wrong. And her cousin, there's video evidence of this, her cousin gets out of the car and she's begging them. She's like, can you please leave Britney alone? She's having a horrible night. If you care about her, please just go away. So when they refuse, she's lost it at this point. She's angry. There's a mother who's been denied access to her children. She's completely distraught. She's upset. She's had enough with all this publicity and paparazzi to begin with. And so she takes an umbrella from her car and begins to hit the truck that the paparazzi were following her in. So these are the photos that that the media uses. And I titled this slide, "What do you see?" Because I think what the media runs with this narrative that she's crazy, that she's lost her mind. But I think looking back now during this time period, when I look at these pictures, all I see is somebody who needs help, somebody who is incredibly hurt, distraught at this situation, who just wants to be left alone, who wants to deal with this family matter privately, who's tired of being asked questions and paraded around on the media as something that she's not. And I think that these photos break my heart. But however, during the time period that this happened in 2008, the press did not run with that narrative at all. So during the time after this photo was taken, Britney is desperate for friendship. She is in custody battle for her children, and she's going through a lot of personal turmoil, and she just needs a good friend. So there's this man called Sam Lufty, who's this kind of like wishy-washy self-help guru who has the habit in Hollywood of becoming very close to celebrities when they're at their most vulnerable. And both of Britney Spears' parents hold him responsible for Britney's mental health crisis in 2008 that would ultimately lead to her conservatorship. He's gone on record many times saying that Britney being unstable and being, this crazy person that the media want her to be made him a lot of money. And so this, as I've just alluded to, this all leads up to Britney's mental health crisis. So on January 3rd, 2008, Britney refuses a court order to hand over her 2 children to Kevin. She is rushed to the hospital for psychiatric evaluation. A judge terminates all of her rights to see her children. And then a month later, after she's released from hospital the first time, she's rushed to hospital again on a 5150. And then this is when Jamie Spears files for a temporary, I want to stress that, temporary conservatorship over Britney Spears. So one of the most common themes here with Britney's mental health and the issues that she's having isn't necessarily about her being this public famous figure that like the fame just got to her head and it was too much for her to handle. As we've seen in her early career, she thrived in that kind of environment. This is about her as a woman, as a mother, being denied basic rights to see her children and having no way to combat that. So Britney, as I said in the previous slide, Britney Spears' father files for a temporary conservatorship, but very quickly after that temporary conservatorship, it's made very, very permanent. He's deemed the sole conservator of her person. And Jamie Spears and a lawyer, Andrew Wallet, are deemed conservators of her estate. So when you enter into a conservatorship, there are 2 different types of conservatorships. Sometimes you can have one of either, or in Britney's case, you can have both. So there's a conservator over a person. So you're making decisions about their health, their doctors, their medical records, what they're eating, their what medicine they're taking, how they're dressing, stuff like that. And then there's also conservators of estates, where it's about the financials, it's about the money, it's about her assets, it's about all of that. So Britney is placed under both of these conservatorships. And during this time, she tries to get a lawyer. I'm going to pull up some notes on my phone really quick so I get this information right. She tries to hire a lawyer during this time. And this, again, is a really messy thing with conservatorships, is that she tries to hire a lawyer for herself, but the judge deems that she's incapable of listening to her counsel. the lawyer who she tried to hire completely disagreed with that kind of psychiatric evaluation of his client. To him, Britney seemed more than capable of retaining counsel and being able to advocate for herself. And one of the only things that she wanted this lawyer to be able to accomplish for her was to request that her father not be the conservator. Again, this was a man who was completely absent during her childhood, who filed for bankruptcy, suffered with a lot of financial issues, and only really came back into Britney's life when she started making so much money. But again, Britney, at this point, she's not trying to get rid of the conservatorship because, like, altogether, she's not trying to fight against the whole concept. She just doesn't want her father there because she needs to comply with the conservatorship in order to see her children. This is the only way that the judge gives her back some parental rights, which is insane. She's completely backed into the corner. So, as I just alluded to, the conservatorship is made permanent in October 2008. And almost immediately, Britney is sent back to work. She's recorded and released a new album and is preparing to go on tour again. And she's making millions of dollars. And she gets a resident position on stage in Las Vegas. This is a huge money-making deal. She's going to basically stay at this stage at this venue and just perform for a few nights every week for a few years. And this is a big, big deal for Britney's estate in terms of bringing in the money. But there's a lot of inconsistencies with that narrative because the public is being told that Britney is somebody who's mentally incapable of dealing with stress, but she's living the life of a busy pop star. She's making music videos, she's performing. With the amount of money being made in this situation, you have to start questioning the motives of those who benefit from the system. They're not taking into account Britney's mental health. All they care about is her being this money machine. And so in 2019, when this kind of whole Free Britney movement started to come about, Britney begins to rebel against her conservators. She refuses to do another residency in Las Vegas. There's this, they're about to announce, essentially what happens is they're about to announce that Britney is staying in Las Vegas, but she's moving to a different venue. And so they set up this huge event. They have this massive crowd. They set up the stage and the media is there and they're live streaming the event. And Britney comes on stage and everyone's like, okay, cool, Britney's going to perform a couple of songs because that's what she's supposed to do. She gets on stage and she just leaves. She walks out. She refuses to do that show. And everything goes very, very quiet. Britney steps back from social media. No one in her family is really saying anything. Her management aren't really saying what's going on. And Andrew Wallet, the other person who was part of the conservatorship of Britney's estate with her father, steps away from that conservatorship. But why would he do that if he's making so much money? There's obviously something happening behind the scenes, something being pushed that we as the public don't know about. So what happened during this time? So Britney's disappeared from social media, and it's revealed that in 2019, she was checked into a mental health hospital. But sources claim, and later court documents from Britney herself confirm that this was not an elected stay in a facility. She didn't need to be there. She was forced into staying at this mental health clinic by her conservators, probably in protest for Britney trying to rebel and trying to make her own independent decisions. So it's this controversy that ignites the Free Britney movement, because Free Britney isn't just talking about the conservatorship during this time, it's talking about literally freeing Britney from a mental health institution that she cannot escape. And her father is calling this movement, the Free Britney movement, a joke. He laughs at it, he thinks it's insane, and he makes it very, very clear that he's not going anywhere and that he's there for his daughter. It's in the best interest of Britney, and yeah, he's there to stay, basically. So part 2, I'm now going to talk more broadly about the issue of conservatorships and its history with the disabled community. So there's an assumed lack of bodily autonomy that has been a common theme in disability activism. Especially, I'm going to be talking in terms of forced sterilization under the guise of medical necessity. This is something that was unfortunately extremely common in practice. Young women confined in the 1920s for conditions including epilepsy, mental illnesses, and a vague diagnosis like feeble-mindedness were often subjected to forced sterilization. I cannot believe that feeble-mindedness is something that people thought was even something that you could diagnose, but then to diagnose and then further go on and forcibly sterilize people who had been given this diagnosis. It's completely insane. But again, these are themes that we can see with Britney Spears, her lack of bodily autonomy. And I wanted to mention this as well. Something that came out recently was that it was revealed that Britney Spears wants more children, and she's been with her fiance Sam since 2016. He's been an incredibly good influence on her. They recently got engaged, and she wants to possibly look at having children, but her conservators who control all of her medical procedures have forced her to get an IUD to have this form of birth control so that she does not have the choice over her own body whether or not she wants to have children, which again, going back to the abortion crisis in Texas and everything, I think it's very prevalent. A very important thing that we need to discuss as a society about this bodily autonomy, especially in this case in people with uteruses, and how that kind of, there's a big intersection there with the disabled community. So there is unfortunately legal precedent for these kinds of forced sterilizations. In 1927, a 17-year-old Carrie Buck was ordered to be sterilized on the grounds of social inadequacy at the Virginia State Colony for the Epileptics and Feeble-Minded. This is a 17-year-old girl. She has her whole life ahead of her, but she's been forced into the Virginia State Colony is essentially a fancy name. I don't know why they call it a colony. It's very problematic, but it's just a hospital building, this facility, for people with epilepsy and feeble-mindedness, whatever the heck that means. She's been forced into this institution, and now this 17-year-old girl, whole life ahead of her, is being forced to be sterilized. So she made appeals. Appeals against Buck's sterilization order were denied following the testimony of the colony superintendent, Dr. Bell. For decades, the case of Buck versus Bell, decided by the US Supreme Court, set a legal precedent for the compulsory sterilization of young people affected by disability, illnesses, and deprivation. So it's not like this was something that was secretly going on behind closed doors. This was something that was publicly condoned by society. The US Supreme Court heard this case and went, yeah, nothing wrong with that. Great. We'll allow that to continue. And I included this picture on the side when I was doing my research for this presentation. There's this girl named Molly McCulley Brown who lived a couple of miles away from the Virginia State Colony, who has cerebral palsy. And she wrote this poetry book. And I read a few of them. They're really beautiful, very harrowing. She wrote this book of poetry called The Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded that kind of explores the injustice of that community from the perspective of somebody who, if she was alive during this time period, she would have suffered the same fate that the 17-year-old Carrie Buck would have. So I just wanted to include that, and I absolutely encourage you guys to go check it out because her poetry is amazing. So the other legal issues with conservatorships, is that it's incredibly hard to leave. So the term itself, conservatorship, is a legal term referring to the legal responsibilities of a conservator over the affairs of a person who has been deemed and I quote this, gravely disabled by the court. How do you how do you judge how someone is quote unquote gravely disabled? It's very subjective. It can lead to, as we've seen in Britney Spears' case, a lot of exploitation where people who gain to benefit from this person being having their rights taken away can make a lot of money off it. It's the burden of the conservatee to prove that they are of sound mind. So this is something that the conservators, the people who are in control, don't have to worry about. This isn't their concern. It's the person who is under the conservatorship who has to prove that they are of sound mind. But as I alluded to previously, Britney tries to do this by getting her own lawyers and trying to prove it in her recent court cases. But then the judge turns around and says she's incapable of having legal counsel. It's very contradictory, and it makes it nearly impossible to do anything in accordance with court proceedings because judges are deeming that they're not able to attain legal counsel. So then how are they supposed to even begin to prove that they are of quote unquote sound mind? So part 3, the future of conservatorship. So bringing us up to date with the Free Britney movement, a lot has happened in the past year, received so much media attention, which is awesome. And it brought to light a lot of these issues with conservatorships. So Britney Spears over the last few years has been making slow and steady progress in removing her father from the conservatorship. Most recently, literally about a week ago, Jamie has been suspended from the conservatorship. So this is a huge win for the Free Britney movement. Her father seems to be gone. He's stepped back as well from the public, from publicity. He's kind of, at first he was very, very much so adamantly fighting for his position in this conservatorship, but with the change in media kind of siding with Britney, he's kind of been, rightly so, villainized. So he's kind of decided to step away, and a judge has deemed that, you know what, his interests in this situation, from what the judge has seen, it seems like it's not been so honest, and it's not necessarily been him fighting for Britney Spears' best interest. So a hearing is actually set on November 12th to determine whether the conservatorship should be terminated altogether. This is an incredibly important court date. It's going to possibly change the course of Britney's life. And I know I spoke a little bit about her recent engagement to Sam. He seems to be an incredibly great influence, as I said, and he wants to marry her, but says that he wants to wait for the conservatorship to end. So her personal life as well in more recent years has been a lot healthier, a lot better, and also her being as active as she has been on spaces like Instagram has meant that she's been able to control the narrative that she's putting out into the press and into publicity. She's deciding the kind of image now that she wants to portray, like, of her daily life. So I think that that's also been really important for Britney as a creative outlet and as an outlet to show the world, like, I'm here, this is me, and I want to be free. I want freedom. So in terms of this whole mess, there are some silver linings. This media attention has highlighted many important issues such as mental health, ableism, and the abuse of conservators. Britney's case, unfortunately, is one of many. And I think I had no idea what conservatorships were before I learned about this issue. And I think it's so important that we've started this kind of public discourse, because these discrepancies that can be seen in Britney's case could set a precedent for other conservatorships, people who are being abused by conservators who are only in it for the money, essentially. So just to finish off this presentation, I had some final thoughts, some final questions that I wanted to leave you guys with. Would this have happened if Britney Spears was a man? I don't think so. I think that when I was researching this, I wanted to include a slide about it, but I wasn't quite sure if I should, or where I could fit it in. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a lot of controversy, kind of similar controversy surrounding Michael Jackson. There's a very infamous photo of him dangling a baby over a balcony. And obviously he was widely criticized for being a bad parent in that instance. Obviously dangling a baby over on a 2-story, 3-story balcony is very different from having your baby on your lap in the car. And I could argue there are a lot of questionable things. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen the documentary about Michael Jackson's sexual abuse on children, and that was all stuff that was put in the court system during about the same time that Britney was undergoing her conservatorship hearings. Michael's charges were cleared. He was never sent to jail for any of his disgusting crimes against children. And so, yeah, I was just comparing those a little bit because I think it's really interesting to see how differently he was treated in the media and in culture compared to Britney Spears. And again, what does our treatment of Britney say about our culture? I think that her shaving her head and then the way that our society and our culture then responded to it by calling her crazy only serves to prove her point that this kind of pop culture royalty that we built in America is incredibly toxic and for everyone. I mean, like as a young girl, you look up to these perfect celebrities and it's just not real. And I think it's very damaging for not only the people, the celebrities themselves, but for the people that look up to them and kind of crave that perfection and look up to it and want to be like them, because it's just not real. And then again, when a conservator is needed, like it seems to me like we need to redraw the lines of conservatorships and when they're necessary and when they're not, and being able to give conservatees, the people who are under the control of conservators, more power in what goes on and making it more of a case-by-case basis instead of making this wide umbrella term to kind of cover very individual needs. And then again, I mentioned quickly this legal term of being gravely disabled. How do you even go about judging that? Is there a test? Is it like the SATs? Like what's going on there? Is it possible? Who is making this judgment call? How are they making this judgment call? Why are they making this judgment call? It seems incredibly yucky, to say the least. But then, it again points to a very big flaw in our legal system of proving something that is, how do you prove something very subjective to be a fact? So yes, that is my presentation on Britney Spears. I'm very passionate about the subject. I am by no means an expert on Britney's life, but if anyone has any questions about conservatorships or Britney Spears or anything that's been happening in her court case, fire away. But I will say Netflix recently released a Britney Spears documentary. I didn't like it as much as the one on Hulu that the New York Times did. So I big recommend the Hulu one if you're trying to decide which one to watch. The one on Hulu, it's 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it is very, very informative. But yeah.
I think the interesting thing in terms of kind of like judging how disabled someone is, I mean, I think historically, again, going back to the Bucky Bell case.
Okay.
Learning in disability studies that from like the earliest of times, like especially like late 19th, early 20th century, you see that disability is thoroughly tied into this intersection of race and gender, where women and people of color, specifically Black people in America, have historically been more easily labeled as disabled. And I think that definitely kind of plays into how you perceive disability. So I think that's definitely an interesting thing to kind of discuss.
No, I absolutely agree. And I just want to thank everyone to listening to me talk about the Free Britney stuff, because it is something I'm passionate about. I think it's a tragedy and injustice of the justice system. But again, I think it's very important to remember that this is one case out of hundreds of thousands that need to be reassessed and looked at. Also, historically, I think it's important for the justice system, for doctors, for medical institutions that were founded based on places like the Virginia colony to come out and say, you know what we did in the past was wrong, and we just want to apologize to all of the families and all of the disabled people that we've affected. I think that it's very important that even those who have been wronged historically, that these institutions now confess to what they've done, analyze it, and apologize for their mistakes. I learned today actually that lobotomies, the process of getting a lobotomy, won a Nobel Prize when it was first introduced in the early 1900s. It received a Nobel Prize for being this great medical discovery. And I think that just goes to show, I mean, you can look at it either way. You can look at it as being something very pessimistic, being like, wow, I can't believe we did that. But also in an optimistic light, we've come so far from that point to be able to now say that was so wrong. And I think it would make a really big difference if these institutions now could come out and kind of say the same thing.
That would definitely be helpful. But I think it's interesting, kind of going back to like the bodily autonomy. I think the wider, I mean, given this is like eugenics is a whole other like presentation that we could potentially do, even though it's a very dark and heavy one. But I mean, I think there's still like kind of like, even though like the more I guess the more obvious aspects of eugenics, such as sterilization, kind of have faded away. I feel like there are like more subtle ways in which, of course, disabled people, disabled bodies are continually being not given their rights to autonomy in different ways. But I mean, I think that's also something to see. Like, we definitely have progressed a lot, but I think there's still definitely a lot, definitely still a ways to go. And I think it's interesting also how, I mean, given conservatorships aren't necessarily things that we think a whole lot about. So the fact that the Free Britney movement kind of highlighted what conservatorships are for so many people is very helpful. So I think it was kind of interesting that, I mean, it's unfortunate that had to happen, but like in terms of like the it's tied to pop culture, like is really interesting in terms of how we were able to actually fully educate people around this concept.
I have a question. So are rules for conservatorships different depending on the state?
Yeah, they are. So in California, where Britney's case was, they're particularly bad. And again, I don't know why. I feel like, again, they're probably, I mean, when I say bad, I mean bad for the conservator, the person who is under the conservatorship. I think it's partly because that there is so much money to be made from being a conservator, that they make it very easy in the state of California to put someone under a conservatorship. They have multiple different kinds to kind of try and encompass everything, and a lot of them, the majority of them have to do with finances and the estate. It seems like the conservatorship of the person itself is something that's more ignored and neglected in terms of what, like, there are no rules of like, as a conservator, now you have to make sure that this person is adequately clothed and bathed and fed, and that their medical needs are being adequately met. There's no like standard for that kind of stuff, but there absolutely is for their finances and their estate and everything like that, because, and again, especially in the state of California, because that seems to be their priority in that situation, not about the person, but about the estate. But yeah, thank you for that question. It's a good question.
We just looked it up because we were wondering, but apparently 60% of conservatorships are on women. So I thought that was pretty interesting, going along with what Cole was saying.
No, absolutely. And unfortunately, I'm not surprised by that at all. I think you have to look at, how women tend to be perceived socially as more feeble. Again, like this whole goes back to that they actually had a medical diagnosis for feeble-mindedness. This is something that this is definitely not a diagnosis given to men all the time. This was something that was given to women as being, this feeble-minded, very, it's easier to control women than it is to control men, if you want to put it in those kinds of terms. So yeah, no, I'm not surprised by that at all. Yeah, no, Lyra, I absolutely agree with your point. I did not look into the state of Texas, but I imagine that it's seeing all the laws have been passed recently, again, it wouldn't surprise me if it was equally as bad. Obviously, in the state of Texas, the courts and the law doesn't seem to care a lot for female bodily autonomy, people with uteruses. It doesn't seem to be somewhat of a priority for them. So yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, we're about out of time. So if Cole, you want to stop recording?
Yes, I will go ahead and